There is something particular about this hour. Not dramatic, not sacred necessarily, just particular. The way the world has drawn itself inward, the way the sounds outside have softened into something more distant, the way the light has gone and left only this quiet, this darkness, this stillness that is neither empty nor full. This reflection draws from the teachings of 3 Stoic philosophers whose words have survived, remarkably, across many centuries. Marcus Aurelius, who was a Roman emperor and a man of genuine philosophical seriousness, wrote not for an audience, but for himself, notes made in private, observations of his own mind, questions turned over in the dark. Seneca, who wrote long letters about the nature of time and the way we lose it, not dramatically but quietly, in worry and distraction. And Epictetus, who began life as a slave and came to understand, through that precise and difficult experience, the difference between what belongs to us and what does not. None of them were perfect. None of them claimed to be. What they shared was a certain orientation, a way of sitting with difficulty without being swept away by it, a steadiness that was not hardness, a calm that was not indifference. That is what this hour is for. Not to solve anything, not to correct anything, just to settle, the way dust settles after movement, the way water finds its level when the disturbance passes. The blanket is there. Its weight is already present, already resting. The room is doing what rooms do at this hour, holding its quiet, absorbing the small sounds of the night. The air has a temperature, not too much of anything. The darkness is the kind that becomes more familiar the longer you remain in it. And somewhere in all of this, there is breath, moving, not directed, not performed, just happening, the way it has always happened, the way it was happening while attention was elsewhere. There is no hurry here. None at all. The mind does a particular thing at night. It turns toward unfinished business, toward the conversation from earlier in the day, the one that ended on an uncertain note or that carried some small tension that was never quite resolved, toward the thing that was said or the thing that wasn't said, toward the response that came too slowly or too sharply or not at all. This is not a flaw in the mind. It is simply what minds do when the external world grows quiet. All day long, the noise of the world gives the mind something to push against, something to respond to, some forward motion to follow. And then the world quiets, and the mind, still running, still moving at its daytime pace, finds itself with nothing to meet it, nothing to direct it. And so it turns inward, and inward is where the unresolved things live. A conversation replays, not once, but several times, different framings each time. What should have been said, what the other person probably meant, what that means about how they see you, what that might mean next week, next month, in some imagined future that doesn't yet exist and may never exist at all. The mind is not doing this to cause suffering. There is something almost dutiful about it. The mind is trying, in its way, to prepare, to anticipate, to close what is open. And none of those impulses are wrong. They are just, at this hour, without anything useful to do. The conversation cannot be revisited tonight. The future cannot be arranged from here. The thing that was said is already fully said, resting exactly where it landed. And yet the thought returns. The replaying continues. A word, a tone, the look on someone's face. Then the mind drifts toward something else, something upcoming, a day that hasn't arrived yet, a task with weight attached to it, a question that doesn't have an answer yet, a decision that can't be made tonight, a situation that will resolve in time, but not in this hour. The mind visits these things as though presence alone could move them forward, as though sitting with the anxiety of them in the dark constitutes some form of productive engagement. It doesn't, quite, but the mind doesn't know that yet. And then there is the more formless version, the kind that isn't attached to any specific thing, just a low hum of unease, a restlessness without a clear object, the sense that something, somewhere, is not quite right, though identifying exactly what it is proves elusive. The mind reaches for it, and it moves, reaches again, and it shifts. This kind of unease is particularly difficult, because there is nothing concrete to release, no specific worry to set aside, just a kind of atmospheric tension, like weather that never quite breaks. None of this is unusual. None of it means anything is wrong. The weight of the blanket is unchanged. The room is still quiet. The darkness is still soft. The body is horizontal, is already doing the things bodies do when they are lying down, when they are resting, whether the mind has caught up yet or not. There is a quality to late-night overthinking that feels urgent, pressing, as though the thoughts themselves are carrying some kind of deadline, some implicit demand to be resolved before sleep can come. This urgency feels real. It has a texture, a pull, but it is worth noticing quietly, without alarm, that the urgency itself is also a thought. The feeling of importance is not the same as actual importance. The sense that something must be figured out tonight is not the same as that thing actually requiring tonight's attention. Seneca wrote, in one of his letters, about the way we torture ourselves with the future, not with what is happening, but with what might happen, with imagined difficulties that have not arrived and may never arrive. He was not dismissive of this tendency. He understood it. He simply observed that we suffer twice, once in anticipation, and once, if it comes at all, in the actual event, and that the first suffering is entirely of our own construction. There is no judgment in that observation, just recognition. The mind is doing what it knows how to do. It is trying to protect. It is trying to prepare. It is running the same patterns that were useful in other contexts, in other moments. They just have nowhere to land right now. They are moving through air. And that is all right. The room holds its quiet. The night continues its long, slow business. The breath moves. The body rests. And the mind, gradually, without being forced, without being told, begins to notice that there is actually nothing it needs to do right now, nothing that requires its effort at this hour. That noticing can take time. It doesn't need to happen quickly. There is no hurry. Epictetus opened his handbook, the Enchiridion, with a distinction. A simple one on the surface, though its implications extend outward in every direction the longer you sit with it. Some things, he wrote, are within our power, and some things are not. Within our power, our own judgments, our own responses, the way we choose to orient ourselves toward what happens, the quality of attention we bring, the values we hold, the interpretation we place on events. Not within our power. Everything else, the actions of other people, the outcomes of events, what happened today, what will happen tomorrow, the opinion someone formed, the conversation that went the way it went, the future that has not yet been written. This is not a call to passivity. Epictetus was not describing a life of inaction. He was making a more precise observation about the nature of the mind's relationship to the world, that there is a category of things we can genuinely influence, and a much larger category of things we cannot, and that much of the suffering that arises at this hour, in this quiet, in this turning over of the day, comes from applying effort and attention to things that belong to the second category, while believing we are working on the first. The conversation that replays, its outcome is already decided. It is complete. Whatever it meant, whatever was understood, whatever impression was formed, all of that has already occurred. There is a version of reviewing it that belongs to the first category, genuine reflection, a sincere asking of whether something could have been done differently. But that kind of review is brief and honest, and arrives at some kind of resting point. The kind that happens at night, in the dark, circling the same words again and again, is something else. It is the mind attempting to change something that can no longer be changed, applying pressure to a door that has already closed. This is not a criticism of the mind. It is just a description of what is happening. The thought that something could have gone differently is itself just a thought. It is not a plan. It is not an instruction. It is an impression passing through awareness, and like all impressions, it does not require action. It does not require belief. It does not require the full weight of identity to attach to it. This is one of the deeper threads in Stoic thought. The idea that thoughts are not commands, that an impression arising in the mind, even a vivid one, even a distressing one, is not the same as a truth about the world. Marcus Aurelius returned to this again and again in his private writing. He would describe an external event or a troubling thought, and then gently, almost experimentally, ask himself what it actually was. Not what it felt like, what it actually was. An event, a series of atoms moving through the world, a thing that happened and was now complete. His interpretation of it, the coloring he applied to it, the weight he assigned it, those were his. Not the thing itself. This distinction has a certain spaciousness to it. The thing that happened today was just the thing that happened today. It had weight because weight was given to it. That weight is not the same as the thing. The worry about tomorrow is just the worry about tomorrow. It is not tomorrow. It is not even a reliable preview of tomorrow. It is the mind's current understanding, shaped by the particular mood and tiredness of tonight, of what tomorrow might contain. That understanding is partial and temporary, and will look different in the morning. None of this is offered to dismiss what feels heavy. The heaviness is real as an experience. It is worth noting, gently, that the experience of something feeling serious and important is not the same as it being as serious and as important as it currently seems. The felt urgency is one data point, not the whole picture. The Stoics were interested in something they called phantasia, which might be translated as impression or appearance. The idea that the way things appear to us, the immediate, unreflective sense of what something means, is not identical to what it is. Between the event and the response, there is a space. The work of Stoic philosophy, as they understood it, took place in that space, not in changing events, which is often impossible, not in suppressing responses, which is neither possible nor desirable, but in the quality of attention brought to the moment between impression and reaction. At this hour, the impressions are still arriving. Thoughts about the day, thoughts about tomorrow, thoughts that feel weighted with significance. They are arriving, and they are passing through, and the noticing of them, the quiet, non-attached observation that here is a thought, here is a worry, here is a loop beginning again. That noticing is itself a kind of practice in what the Stoics were pointing toward. Not fixing, just noticing. The room is still. The weight of the body is present. The darkness outside the window holds a few sounds, something distant, something that was there before and is still there, the continuity of the night carrying on without needing anything from this moment. The breath moves, has been moving, continues to move. There is something settling in that continuity. Seneca wrote about time with a particular kind of urgency that can seem, at first glance, like the opposite of what is being offered here. He was often pointing out how much time is lost, not wasted in obvious ways, but simply not fully inhabited, not truly lived in, spent in anxiety about what might come, spent in regret about what already went, spent in distraction and avoidance. His concern was genuine. But what he was ultimately pointing toward was this: the present moment is the only time that actually belongs to us. The past is complete and unreachable. The future is uncertain and unformed. This moment, this breath, this weight, this quiet, this is the place where something real is available. Not as a lesson, not as an instruction to be present, just as a description of what is already true. This moment is here. The others are not. And in this moment, the body is resting. The night is doing what night does. The mind is moving, yes, still turning things over, still carrying some tension, but even the awareness of that movement is already a kind of settling, already a little softer than the movement itself. The impermanence of emotional states is something the Stoics understood with particular clarity, not as consolation, though it functions as that too, but as a straightforward observation about the nature of experience. Nothing stays. Not the difficult feeling, not the loop of thought, not the tightness in the chest that sometimes accompanies this hour. Each of these has a beginning and will have an end, not because they are forced to end, not because anything is done to dissolve them, but simply because that is the nature of states. They move, they change, they give way to the next thing. This particular feeling of late-night mental restlessness will pass, not because of anything being done here, simply because it always does. Because the morning comes with a different quality of awareness, a different sense of proportion, a different relationship to the things that felt so pressing and heavy in the dark. That is already happening, in its way. The night is already moving. The hour is already later than it was. Nothing needs to be resolved tonight. Nothing at all. Marcus Aurelius had a habit of reducing things, not dismissively. He was not a man who dismissed difficulty. He knew difficulty well, the weight of responsibility, the experience of loss, the frustration of working alongside people who did not share his values. He was not naive about the texture of hard things, but he had a practice of asking, what is this actually? Stripped of its associations, stripped of the interpretation, stripped of the story that has built up around it, what is the thing itself? A conversation was a series of words exchanged between two people, both of them tired, both of them carrying their own unresolved things, both of them perceiving the world through the particular lens of their particular history. What was said was said. What was understood in the way it was understood. Neither of these things can be changed now. They are complete. They belong to the past, which is the one part of time that is, in a certain sense, entirely safe. Nothing can touch it any more. It has already happened exactly as it happened. The interpretation of it is still alive, still available to be adjusted, still subject to the mood of this particular hour, the tiredness, the quiet, the isolation that night sometimes brings. An interpretation made at this hour about an event that is complete is not necessarily a reliable interpretation. It is colored by the hour, by the body's tiredness, by the particular way anxiety sharpens some things and blurs others. This is not a failure of perception. It is just how perception works. It is always partial, always situated, always arriving through the particular conditions of the moment in which it occurs. There is something freeing in that recognition, not as an argument to dismiss what was felt, but as a reminder that the story currently being told about today, about the conversation, about tomorrow, is one story, one reading, not a fixed truth about the nature of things. Seneca was a man who thought a great deal about the gap between what we fear and what actually arrives. He watched himself anticipate disasters that never came. He noticed the way the imagined version of a difficult thing was often more frightening than the actual thing, because the imagined version could be made as large as the mind chose to make it, while the actual thing was bounded by reality, by circumstance, by the thousand small details that limit the size of actual events. He also noticed something else, that there are things worth addressing, worth taking seriously, worth the mind's genuine attention, but that the night, this hour, this darkness, this particular state of tiredness and quiet, is rarely the right time for that addressing. That the mind visiting a problem at 2 a.m. is not the same mind that will engage with it clearly in the morning. It is a more frightened version, a more isolated version, a version that cannot see the full picture because the full picture includes other people, other light, other perspectives, the simple biological shift that comes with rest. The thought can be acknowledged. It has arrived. It is noted. It does not need to be followed all the way to its conclusion tonight. That is not avoidance. Avoidance is turning away from something that needs attention. Recognizing that this particular hour is not the right container for a certain kind of thinking is something different. It is a kind of appropriate judgment about timing. The thought will be there in the morning. The situation will be there in the morning. It will not dissolve, because it was not solved tonight. And something in the body already knows this. There is a tiredness that is deeper than the mind's alertness, a heaviness that is present regardless of what the mind is doing. The body has already made its decision about this hour. It has been lying still. It has been carrying the weight of the blanket. It has been doing the slow, patient work of rest while the mind ran its circles. The body is not anxious. The body is just tired and horizontal and warm. There is a long tradition in various contemplative practices of distinguishing between the thinking mind and the observing mind. The thinking mind is the one that produces the thoughts, the scenarios, the replays, the worries. The observing mind is the one that can watch all of that occurring without being identical to it. Stoic philosophy arrives at something similar through its own route. The idea that there is a faculty, what the Stoics called the hegemonikon, the governing or guiding faculty, that can watch the impressions arrive without being automatically carried by them. This is not a special ability. It is not a technique. It is a natural capacity that exists and becomes more available simply by being noticed. The very act of becoming aware that a thought is happening, that a worry is circling, that the mind is in a loop, is already a slight shift. Already the thing watching the thought and the thought itself are not identical. There is already a small but real gap there. In that gap is the steadiness the Stoics were pointing toward, not a forced calm, not a suppression of the movement, just the recognition that the movement is happening, and that something is also here that is not the movement, something that has been quiet all along while the thoughts ran their course, something that is, in a certain sense, already at rest. The night sounds continue. Something outside, small and distant. The natural sounds of a building at rest. A house settling into its own quiet. The air in the room moves slightly, carries a temperature that is neither cold nor hot, simply there, present, unremarkable, and steady. The breath is still moving, slow and even and completely automatic. There is a version of thinking about impermanence that feels like loss, that everything passes, that nothing lasts, that even the good things are already on their way toward ending. This version is true, but it is not the only version, and it is perhaps not the most useful version to sit with at this hour. There is another version. Everything that is difficult is also passing. The emotional state that has some grip right now, the low-level tension, the sense of unease, the loop that keeps returning, all of this is moving, has been moving since it began, is already somewhere different from where it started, will be somewhere different again before this night is over. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this not as consolation, but as observation. He had lived through a great deal of difficulty. He had lost people. He had faced external pressures that were genuinely enormous. He did not minimize these, but he had noticed over and over that even the most intense states were not permanent, that the thing that felt overwhelming on one day was, some days later, somehow smaller, not because it had been solved, not because anything had been resolved, simply because time had moved around it, and time changes the relationship between a person and a difficulty. This is not quite the same as saying things get better, which is a different kind of claim, less reliable, more conditional. This is simply saying that things change. The state changes. The relationship to the thing changes. The quality of how something feels in the body changes. Even without intervention. Even without resolution. The thought that is cycling now will not cycle with this same intensity forever. The worry that feels urgent will not feel equally urgent in the morning, or in 3 days, or in 3 months. Not because it will necessarily be resolved, but because everything moves. Even the things that feel fixed, especially the things that feel fixed, are moving underneath. Epictetus said something that can seem, at first, slightly cold, that we should not seek for things to happen as we wish them to happen, but wish for things to happen as they actually do happen, and we will find tranquility. There is a misreading of this that turns it into passivity, into giving up. But what he was pointing toward was something more specific, that the suffering which comes from insisting that reality should be different from what it is, that the conversation should have gone differently, that the future should hold less uncertainty, that the mind should be quieter than it is right now. This suffering is not imposed by circumstances. It is added. It is a layer placed over what is already there. And it is a layer that can, with time and a particular kind of attention, become thinner. Accepting what is does not mean believing it is good. It does not mean stopping the effort to change what can be changed. It means not adding the suffering of resistance to the difficulty that is already present, not fighting the fact of the difficulty on top of the difficulty itself. The mind is a little restless tonight. That is what it is. Not a problem to be solved. Not evidence of something wrong. Just what is happening, clearly and simply, in this moment. The mind is doing what minds do when the world has gone quiet. It is running through its unfinished business. It will continue for a while, and then, gradually, as it always does, it will slow. It will find less to attach to. It will begin to drift rather than circle. That drifting is already there in potential. It is not far. There is something worth sitting with in the word acceptance, because it is a word that can sound like defeat, like resignation, like the absence of hope. But in the Stoic sense, it carries a different quality. It is closer to accuracy, to seeing what is actually there without adding to it or subtracting from it, to being with the actual situation rather than the heightened or feared version of it. The actual situation, right now, in this moment, is simply this: a person lying in a dark room, tired, with a mind that is still moving, in a quiet house, at the end of a day. That is the actual situation. It is not catastrophic. It is not even, in its plain form, particularly difficult. It is just the end of a day, the beginning of a night, a mind winding down through its own particular process. The layer of interpretation on top of that, the weight of tomorrow, the uncertainty about various outcomes, the replay of the day's events, those are real as experiences, but they are additions. They are the mind's contribution to the moment. And the moment itself, without those additions, is simply quiet, simply here. There is a perspective the Stoics returned to regularly that can feel either dizzying or deeply calming, depending on how it is held. The smallness of any single moment in the span of time. Seneca wrote about the vastness of time before any of us existed, and the vastness of time that will continue after we are gone, and observed that our lives, our days, our particular worries and preoccupations are contained within a sliver so narrow that the metaphor almost breaks down. And he did not mean this as a way to make life seem meaningless. He meant something more precise, that the urgency we attach to particular moments, the sense that this specific worry, this specific conversation, this specific unresolved thing is of enormous consequence, is a distortion created by proximity. Stand close enough to anything, and it fills the whole field of vision. Step back, not in space, but in time, in perspective, and the proportion changes. The thing that is worrying the mind tonight has a context. It is part of a day, which is part of a week, which is part of a year, which is part of a life that contains many years, which is itself part of a history that extends back before any of this and forward into futures none of us can see. None of this erases what happened today. None of it removes the reality of difficulty, but it does shift the proportion. It does, quietly, relieve the particular urgency that the night tends to magnify. Marcus Aurelius, who was responsible for an empire, who made decisions that affected millions of people, who lived under a kind of pressure that is difficult to imagine, wrote privately about the need to remember this perspective. Not as a coping mechanism, not as a technique, but as a practice of accuracy, as a way of seeing things in their actual size rather than the inflated size that proximity and anxiety create. He wrote about those who came before him. Great emperors, powerful men, men whose names had seemed permanent. And he observed quietly that they were gone, that the concerns that had consumed them were gone, that the dramas and the urgencies and the conflicts, all of it, had dissolved into the same history that would eventually absorb his own concerns, his own dramas, his own sleepless nights. This is not nihilism. It is perspective. There is a difference. Nihilism says nothing matters. Perspective says that the immediate sense of what matters and the actual weight of things in a larger context are often quite different from each other, and that recognizing that difference is not pessimistic, but is, in a certain way, liberating. The thing that feels enormous at this hour is not enormous. It is a thing happening in a life, in a day, in a year, held within a history and a future that extends so far in both directions that the coordinates are genuinely difficult to hold. Whatever it is one thing among the uncountable things that have happened and will happen. It is real, and it may require attention. But it is not as large as it currently feels. The night, with its particular quality of silence and darkness and isolation, tends to enlarge things. It removes the context that makes proportion visible. There are no other people in the room to reflect things back to their ordinary size. There is no sunlight, no movement, no distraction, no continuity with the ordinary pace of the day. There is just the mind and its contents, and the dark. This is a particular kind of optical illusion, not of vision, but of thought. The mind, alone in the dark, has nothing to compare its worries against, and so they can expand to fill whatever space is available. They can feel like the most important things in the world, because at this moment they are the only things in the immediate world. But that is the room's effect. That is the night's effect. It is not an accurate report on the size of things. In the morning, in the light, in the presence of other people and other sounds and other concerns, everything finds its proportion again, not because the difficulty has been resolved, but because the context has been restored. The difficulty sits within a life that also contains other things. That life sits within a world that contains many lives. That world sits within a span of time so long that even the most consequential human events are, from a sufficient distance, or very small. There is something restful in that smallness, not emptying, but quieting. The pressure eases slightly when the thing being worried about is understood, not dismissed, but genuinely understood, as one thing among the enormous number of things happening in one moment among the enormous number of moments, in one life among the enormous number of lives. The stars, on a clear night, carry this sense without needing to say anything. The simple fact of the sky's depth changes something in the body. There is a reason people look up when they want to feel differently about their circumstances. The scale alone does something. It is not philosophical argument. It is just perspective, physical and immediate, the body understanding what the mind has been told, but struggled to believe. And though there is only a ceiling above this room, and a dark sky beyond that, the sky is still out there. The depth is still present even when invisible. The same vast, indifferent continuity that made Marcus Aurelius feel the smallness of his own urgency is present tonight, extending in every direction, holding this moment and every other moment in the same quiet, ungrasping way. This hour is one point in a long night, that is one night in a long life, that is itself a brief thing inside the enormous span of everything that has happened and will happen. It is held lightly in all of that. Whatever is unresolved in this moment is unresolved in all that context. It is not being held alone. It never has been. And there is something in that which is not frightening at all, once the initial disorientation passes. Something that is almost companionable. The vastness is not cold. It is simply what holds everything, equally, without preference or urgency, the way the ocean holds both the wave and the quiet water beneath it. The wave is real. Its movement is real. And the depth underneath it has been there the whole time, far older than the wave, entirely undisturbed by it. This moment is the wave. The depth is everything else, everything that came before, everything that continues, the long quiet of time moving through its own slow and enormous business, while the mind worries and plans and replays and searches. The depth is not waiting for the wave to settle. It simply is. And in a small way, in the space between one thought and the next, that depth is also here. Seneca had a practice of imagining the long stretch of time before his own birth, all those centuries in which he did not exist, and then imagining the long stretch of time after his death, all the centuries in which he would not exist again, and then placing his own brief life between those two immensities. Not to feel small exactly, though there is a natural humbling in the exercise, but to feel, with some accuracy, the proportion of things. To understand that the brevity of a human life, far from making it tragic, makes it precious in a particular way. Not because it is short and therefore urgent, but because it is short and therefore worth inhabiting fully in each of its moments, including this one, including this dark and quiet hour, which is not separate from the life, but is part of it, is fully part of it. This moment is part of the life, not a pause in the life, not the corridor between one meaningful event and the next. The moment itself, this one with its quiet and its warmth and its tired and circling mind, is the life, is a complete and unrepeatable instance of being alive. Marcus Aurelius returned to this, too, the recognition that each moment is its own complete thing, that this is not a rehearsal for some other, better version of the day, that the present, this one, regardless of how it arrived or how it feels, is the place where living actually occurs. There is something in that recognition that tends to reduce urgency rather than increase it. If this moment is not merely a waypoint on the road to resolution, then it does not need to become resolution in order to be adequate. It is already adequate. It is already the thing itself. The room is doing nothing but being the room. The night is doing nothing but being the night. and this is exactly what the room and the night are for. There is no version of the room that would be better at being the room. There is no improved night that would do the work of the night more effectively. They are simply here, as they are, which is everything they need to be. And in the same quiet and unremarkable way, being here, as this moment is, with whatever it contains, is also everything that is needed. Not because everything is comfortable or resolved, simply because this is where the life is, where everything, including rest, including the gradual loosening of the mind's grip, actually occurs. Nothing else is required. Nothing more than this. The Stoics were sometimes misread as being against emotion. This is not quite what they were saying. They were not arguing for a life without feeling, without care, without the natural movements of a human being engaged with other human beings in a world that is genuinely uncertain and often difficult. They were not describing a kind of emotional flatness that would be, in practice, not wisdom, but disconnection. What they were pointing toward was something more specific. The difference between emotions that arise naturally in response to what is real and the amplified, extended, self-perpetuating versions of those emotions that the mind generates when it applies its considerable energy to feeding rather than simply experiencing what arises. There is a natural version of worry that is useful. It arises, it carries information. It points toward something that might need attention, and then it passes once that attention has been given, or once it becomes clear that the thing is out of one's hands. This version of worry is not a problem. The version that arrives at night is often different. It has picked up speed during the day and arrived here still running. It has generated additional content, additional scenarios, additional layers of interpretation and anticipation. It has, in some cases, departed significantly from the original concern, and is now circling territory that has very little to do with what actually happened today or will actually happen tomorrow. Seneca had a particular insight about anger that applies equally to anxiety. He noted that anger, once engaged, is difficult to stop because each step of the process seems reasonable from inside it. It generates its own fuel. It finds new evidence. It builds a case that feels increasingly airtight from the inside, and the person engaged in it is not aware, while it is happening, that the process itself is distorting what it touches. Anxiety at night does something similar. Each circuit of a worry generates slightly more worry. Each visit to an unresolved question creates slightly more urgency around its resolution. The mind is working, but it is not making progress. It is generating activity that feels like progress, but is, in effect, circular. The recognition of this, quiet and non-judgmental, is itself a kind of interruption. Not a forced stop, not a suppression. Just a noticing that the movement is happening, that it has a particular quality, that it is not arriving somewhere new, but returning to somewhere already visited. That noticing is the small things that the Stoics were describing when they talked about the governing faculty. The part of awareness that can watch without being entirely swept up. It does not stop the movement, but it changes the relationship to it. And a changed relationship is often enough for the intensity to begin, slowly to reduce. Epictetus described something he called prosoke, which might be translated as attention to oneself, a kind of watchful awareness of what is happening inside, not obsessive self-monitoring, not anxious self-analysis, just a calm noticing of the quality of what is occurring, the way a person might notice the weather without being distressed by it. It is raining. It's cold. The mind is circling. All of these are simply descriptions of conditions. The conditions will change. They always change. In the meantime, the body is present. The room is present. The night is present. And underneath the movement of thought, underneath the restlessness and the replays and the uncertain futures being built in the imagination, there is something that is not moving, something that has been there all along, not because it was constructed or achieved, but simply because it was never absent. The ground, in a sense, that was always under everything, even during the most agitated moments. The Stoics described it in different ways at different times. Marcus Aurelius sometimes called it the rational faculty. Epictetus sometimes described it as the part of us that is truly our own, the one thing that cannot be taken away. Seneca sometimes came at it from the direction of time, the still point within the movement. Whatever name is given to it, there is something in this description that resonates in the body at this hour. The sense that beneath the noise, there is something that is not the noise, that the mind's activity, however real, however vivid, is not the whole of what is here. The body is quiet, the room is quiet, the breath is quiet, and in the spaces between the thoughts, if attention rests there even briefly, there is something that does not require any effort to maintain, something already at rest. It has not been waiting to be found. It has simply been here, continuous and unremarkable, while the more dramatic activity of thought occupied the foreground. This quality of the ground does not need to be named or claimed or held. It simply continues beneath everything, as it has been continuing through the whole of this long day and this long night, and all the long days and nights before them. There is nothing to do with it. It does not need to be cultivated or preserved. It persists without tending. It is simply the deeper layer of what is already here. And knowing that gently, without grasping at it, is enough. One of the more unexpected effects of sitting with the Stoic distinction between what is and what is not within our control is the relief it can bring. Not immediately, perhaps. At first, the recognition that most things are outside our control can produce a different kind of anxiety, a sense of helplessness, of groundlessness. If the outcome is not in my hands, if how other people respond is not in my hands, if the future is not in my hands, then what is there to hold? But this reaction is based on a misunderstanding of what control was ever offering. The idea that control over outcomes is available, that the future can be arranged, that other people can be reliably predicted and influenced, that the conversation would have gone differently if only the right words had been found. These ideas are themselves a source of the exhaustion of late-night thinking, because they place the mind in an impossible position. They ask it to solve a problem that is, in its nature, unsolvable. They generate the sense that if only enough thinking were done, enough scenarios considered, enough contingencies prepared for, then certainty could be achieved. Certainty is not available. It was never available. And the recognition of this, fully, not as a defeat but as an accurate description of conditions, can release a pressure that has been building for a long time. Not a dramatic release, not a sudden peace, just a quiet reduction in the tension that comes from trying to hold something that cannot be held. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this with a kind of calm that suggests he had genuinely arrived somewhere through years of returning to the same understanding. He did not claim perfection. He did not claim to have eliminated anxiety or concern. He simply described, over and over, the practice of returning to what was actually in his hands, the quality of his own intention, the honesty of his own effort, the care he brought to his own choices, and then releasing, as fully as he could, what happened after that. This is not passivity, it is precision. The energy that was being spent in attempting to control what could not be controlled becomes gradually available for other things, for genuine engagement, for the things that are actually within reach, for the quality of attention in this moment, which is the only moment genuinely available. Epictetus once described the way an actor approaches a role. The character assigned to them may be difficult, may be minor, may not be the role they would have chosen. But the quality of the performance, the fullness with which the actor inhabits whatever role they have been given, that is entirely within their hands. The role itself is not. The circumstances are not. The audience's response is not. But the quality of presence in the doing of it, that belongs to the person entirely. There is something in this that applies to the experience of lying in the dark at this hour, with a mind still running through its concerns. The day happened the way it happened. Tomorrow will arrive with its own conditions. The responses of other people, the outcomes of situations, the resolution of uncertainties. None of these are available here. But the quality of how this hour is inhabited, the degree to which the mind can, gradually and without force, release its grip on what it cannot change, that is, in a quiet way, present. Not as a task, not as something to achieve, just as a direction, a gentle orientation. The grip loosens, not because it is forced open, but because the mind, understanding what it is actually holding on to, and seeing that it is not something that can be changed by holding, simply finds the holding less necessary. The hand opens, not by decision, by recognition. There is also something worth sitting with in the specific texture of what is being held. When the mind circles a worry in the dark, what is it actually gripping? Often it is not the situation itself, but the self's relationship to the situation. Not what happened, but what that might mean about how one is seen, or understood, or valued. Not the future difficulty itself, but the possibility of not being adequate to meet it. The worry, examined honestly, is often less about the external situation, and more about the self within the situation. And this is where Epictetus's insight carries particular weight. The self within the situation, the quality of intention and honesty and care brought to whatever happens, that is genuinely available. It is not threatened by the uncertainty of outcomes. The integrity of the inner life does not depend on how things turn out. It depends only on the quality of attention and care brought to what is actually within reach. This is not a small reassurance. It is a genuinely steady kind of ground. Whatever happens tomorrow, the quality of who is present to meet it remains available. It is not diminished by tonight's uncertainty. It does not require tonight's questions to be answered in order to be intact. It is already intact, and the night continues, and the room holds its quiet, and the body lies in its warmth, and the breath moves without being directed. It is worth noting that these thoughts do not resolve anything. This is perhaps appropriate. Philosophy at its best does not resolve things so much as change their quality. It does not remove difficulty so much as alter the relationship to it. A problem seen from a different angle is not necessarily solved, but is, in a real sense, different. What felt like a wall may, from a different position, reveal a door that was always there, or may simply look less like a wall and more like a condition of the landscape, something to be acknowledged and moved alongside rather than defeated. The late-night mind wants resolution, wants completion, wants the loop to arrive at its destination and stop. And the particular frustration of this hour is that the loops rarely arrive anywhere useful. They circle back. They begin again. The same worry visits again, with the same weight, or occasionally, with slightly more. There is a gentler understanding of what the mind is doing when this happens. It is not malfunctioning. It is applying a strategy that works in many contexts. The strategy of continued engagement, of not releasing a problem until it is solved, to a situation where that strategy is not useful and cannot yield what it is seeking. The mind is trying to be helpful in the only way it knows how. It has not yet received the message that this particular effort is not the right tool for this particular problem. The message is not a dramatic one, not a command, not a corrective, just a quiet observation that what is being sought here, certainty, resolution, a sense that everything is managed and arranged, is not something this hour can provide, and that its absence does not actually constitute danger, that the uncertainty of tomorrow is not a threat to right now, that the unresolved conversation is not an emergency, that the mind can, without anything being concluded, without anything being answered, simply rest. This is perhaps the most repeated insight in Stoic writing, arriving in different forms and from different angles, but returning to the same basic recognition. The suffering that is added to difficulty by the mind's resistance to uncertainty is not necessary. It is not imposed. It can be, with patience and a certain quality of honest attention, reduced, not eliminated, reduced. Even a small reduction is real. Even a slight loosening of the grip is a change in conditions. And conditions, once changed, have a tendency to continue changing. The slight loosening becomes a slightly fuller loosening. The breath that was shallow becomes a little slower. The body that was slightly tense releases a little of that tension. The mind that was tight with urgency finds, somewhere inside the movement, a small pocket of stillness. That pocket is always there. It is not created. It is found. Or perhaps, more accurately, it finds attention when attention is available to be found. And attention is available here. The day is done. There is nowhere to go. Nothing that genuinely requires action right now. No one waiting on a response. No problem that needs to be solved before morning. Nothing, when it is looked at plainly, that this specific hour requires anything from. That is a spacious recognition. Nothing is required right now. Nothing at all. What is also true, and worth resting in, is that this particular spaciousness, this recognition that nothing is required, is itself a kind of fullness. It is not absence. The emptiness of obligation at this hour is not a lack but an opening. the mind is released temporarily from the forward-pressing motion of the day. It is no longer in service of anything, no longer needed. And there is something in that release, even when the mind resists it, even when the habits of urgency persist for a while longer, that is genuinely generous. The night offers this every night, unconditionally, without requiring anything in return. It simply arrives and makes its offer. There is nothing needed here. Whatever the day required, it has already been given. The rest belongs to the body, to the quiet, to whatever part of the self does not run on effort and intention, but on something older and simpler. That part is already engaged, has been engaged since the body became horizontal. It does not wait for the mind to catch up. It simply proceeds. There is something in the human mind that has a difficult relationship with incompleteness. Tasks undone, conversations unfinished, questions unanswered. The mind has a strong preference for the closed loop, the resolved situation, the full stop at the end of the sentence. And this preference, in ordinary circumstances, is useful. It drives completion. It maintains follow-through. It provides the satisfying sense of things attended to and put down properly. But life does not always provide the full stop. Many things remain open. Many conversations end without resolution. Many questions persist without answers. Many situations stay uncertain for days or weeks or longer. And the mind, encountering this persistent incompleteness, can enter a kind of holding pattern, circling the open loop, as though continued attention will close it. It will not at this hour, and the Stoics had something to offer on this, not as instruction, but as perspective. Acceptance, in the Stoic sense, is sometimes described as the acceptance of fate, of what has occurred and what cannot be changed. But there is a quieter version of this that applies to the present, acceptance of the current state, including its unresolved qualities, including the incompleteness, including the uncertainty. These are not failures of the situation. They are simply the honest condition of it. And resting within an incomplete situation, not having resolved it, not having answered all the questions, not having arranged everything satisfactorily, is not failure. It is just resting. The situation will be exactly as complete or incomplete in the morning. The rest changes nothing about the situation, but it changes something about the person within it. Seneca wrote about the man who has learned to rest, not the man who has learned to sleep efficiently or to optimize his recovery, but the man who has genuinely found a relationship with stillness that allows him to inhabit an incomplete situation without being continuously disturbed by its incompleteness. This was, for Seneca, a mark of genuine philosophical progress, not the ability to solve more problems or bear more difficulty, the ability to be still while problems remained unsolved. This stillness is not a performance. It is not a decision. It is more like a settling that occurs when the mind has genuinely received the recognition that effort is not required right now, that the situation will wait, that the problems will still be there to engage with when engagement is appropriate, and that this moment, this hour, this quiet, this darkness, this warmth, this breath is not the right container for that engagement. The appropriate response to this hour is rest, not as a command, just as a description of what fits. The Stoics talked frequently about what they called kathekon, often translated as appropriate action, the action fitting to the situation, the response that matches the actual conditions rather than the imagined or feared conditions, and the appropriate action for a tired person lying in the dark at the end of a day, in a quiet room, with no actual emergency present, is simply to be there, to be horizontal, to be warm, to let the breath move, to allow the mind its gradual quieting without requiring that the quieting happen faster or more completely than it naturally will. Appropriate. Not heroic. Not disciplined. Just appropriate. There is a quiet dignity in that, in the simple rightness of doing what the situation actually calls for, rather than what the mind's anxiety insists is urgent. The room is appropriate. The darkness is appropriate. The warmth is appropriate. The breath is appropriate. Everything, in its quiet way, is as it should be. And within that appropriateness, there is space for the open loops to simply remain open. They do not need to be closed tonight. They are not wounds that require immediate attention. They are questions that will find their answers in their own time, through the ordinary movement of days and conversations and circumstances that have not yet arrived. The mind does not need to force them closed. It can simply acknowledge them, each one, without urgency, and allow them to rest alongside everything else that is resting in this room. The open loop is part of the quiet, too. It belongs here. It is not foreign to this hour. It is just another thing that is here, present and undemanding, waiting without urgency for the morning. There is also something worth sitting with about the nature of resolution itself. The mind treats resolution as the goal, as the destination toward which all this circling is aimed. But resolution is rarely the sudden, complete thing the nighttime mind imagines it will be. Most resolutions are gradual, partial, arrived at not through nocturnal effort, but through the ordinary passage of time and conversation, and the natural unfolding of circumstances. The conversation that needs to happen will happen when it happens. The decision that needs to be made will be made when the relevant information is available and the right moment arrives. The situation that is uncertain will clarify in its own time through means that cannot be forced or anticipated from here. This is simply how things unfold, not because of any particular wisdom or patience on anyone's part, but because that is the actual texture of how change and resolution move through a life. Understanding this gently does not mean becoming passive or detached from what matters. It means allocating effort appropriately. Effort has its time. This hour is not that time. This hour is the time for the body to do its quiet, recovering work, and for the mind to gradually release its grip on the idea that something essential depends on its continued running. Nothing essential depends on it. The night will continue with or without the mind's effort. The morning will arrive with or without resolution having been achieved here. The situation will still be what it is, and the person meeting it will be, if rest has been allowed to occur, in a better position to meet it. Not because rest is a technique for performance, simply because a rested mind sees more clearly, has more access to its own deeper understanding, is less governed by the particular distortions that tiredness and isolation produce. Rest is not a reward for having resolved things. It is what makes clearer thinking possible afterward. The room is appropriate. The darkness is appropriate. The warmth is appropriate. The breath is It is worth staying, for a moment, with the image of Marcus Aurelius writing. He wrote his private notes, what we know as the Meditations, across years of military campaigns, of administrative difficulty, of personal loss. He was not writing for publication. He was not composing a philosophical treatise for posterity, though that is what the writing became. He was writing in the way people sometimes write in journals at night, to clarify his own thinking, to return himself to principles he found slipping away, to remind himself again of what he knew and was struggling to hold on to in the pressure of his circumstances. He was, in a sense, talking to himself, and the quality of that self-talk is striking, not because it is inspiring or motivating, which it sometimes is, but because of how patient it is. How often he returns to the same basic points, how he does not seem to expect to have permanently arrived at any understanding, but simply to need to revisit it regularly, in different forms, with different language, as a practice of maintenance, rather than achievement. He writes about the same themes repeatedly. The distinction between what is in our control and what is not, the impermanence of everything, the smallness of our concerns in the span of time, the importance of the quality of our own intentions, the steadiness available in the present moment. He does not write these things once, learn them, and move on. He writes them again and again because he needs to, because the same forgetting keeps occurring, because living in the world tends to obscure these recognitions, and they need to be refreshed. There is something profoundly ordinary about that, not in a diminishing sense, in a human sense, in the sense that recognizes that even someone of considerable philosophical seriousness and long practice needed to keep returning to the basics, kept needing to remind himself of what he had many times understood, kept finding that the world had gotten in around the edges of his understanding, and that maintenance was required. The late-night mind, circling its concerns, is not a sign of philosophical failure. It is not evidence of inadequate understanding or insufficient practice. It is just the mind doing what the mind does, and even Marcus Aurelius's mind did this. Even Seneca, who wrote so brilliantly about equanimity, admitted to anxiety. Even Epictetus, whose clarity about what is and is not in our control was exceptional, was not describing a state he had achieved and maintained without effort. He was describing a direction, a practice, a returning. The returning is the practice, returning to the recognition that the worry is a thought, not a command, returning to the understanding that this hour does not require resolution, returning to the body and its weight and its warmth and its breath, returning to the simple and sufficient fact of being here, in this quiet room, at the end of this particular day. Each return is not a failure to have arrived. It is the practice itself, and the practice does not need to be done correctly. It does not need to produce a specific result by a specific time. It is simply available, quietly, in the space between one thought and the next, in the breath between one worry and the next, in the small interval where the mind, just briefly, finds nothing to attach to. That interval is here. It keeps returning. Like everything else, it is impermanent. Like everything else, it passes. And also, like everything else, it comes back. Marcus Aurelius did not achieve permanent equanimity. He wrote his notes, and then he went back to the difficulty of the day, and then he wrote his notes again. The notes themselves are the evidence of his continued returning. Each page is a new act of remembering, a new attempt to re-inhabit the understanding that the day had, once again, partially obscured. This is a humble model. It asks nothing exceptional. It does not require that the mind be free of its worries by now, or that the restlessness have already dissolved, or that the thoughts have quieted to a particular standard. It only asks for the small act of returning, of noticing that the movement is happening, of gently orienting back toward what is actually here, the room, the warmth, the breath. Nothing more complicated than that. The night has a continuity that the thinking mind tends not to notice. Not narrative continuity. Not the continuity of meaning or progress or direction. Just the simple, factual continuity of the night itself, the way it persists, the way it holds the same qualities across its hours. The darkness that is now the same darkness that has been here since dark fell. The quiet that has been present all along beneath whatever noise or movement occurred within it. There is something in this continuity that is quietly reassuring without being dramatic about it. The room has been holding its quiet the entire time. Whether or not attention was directed there, the room was doing its room things, resting, containing, maintaining its temperature, allowing the small sounds of the building to pass through it, holding the darkness against the window, remaining. The continuity is not dependent on being noticed. It just continues. In the same way, the breath has been happening, entirely without management or attention, throughout all of this. During the replaying of the conversation, the breath was moving. During the imagining of tomorrow's difficulties, the breath was moving. During the most alert and tightly wound moment of the evening's thinking, the breath was moving. It did not require anything. It simply continued. And the body beneath all of it was horizontal, was still, was already doing the things that bodies do when they are lying down, processes quiet and biological and continuous, entirely independent of what the mind was occupied with. There is a strange comfort in this, the recognition that the rest was happening even before the mind arrived at rest, that the body was already ahead of the process, already engaged in the work of recovery, already settling, while the mind was still running its circuits. The body was not waiting for permission. It was not held up by the unresolved things. It simply proceeded, as bodies do, with the business of the night. Seneca wrote about the relationship between body and mind at night with a kind of tenderness that is easy to overlook in his writing, which can sometimes seem austere. He observed that sleep was a daily reminder of our vulnerability, and also a daily reminder of our capacity for renewal, that each night the whole apparatus of a life, the concerns and the plans and the identities and the worries, was set aside, however briefly, and something more fundamental continued, and that this setting aside was not a defeat of anything but a natural rhythm, as unremarkable as breathing, as necessary as water. The night is doing this now, has been doing it, will continue to do it. The mind's participation in this process, its eventual quieting, its eventual release into something less effortful, is not an achievement. It is not something that needs to be managed or earned. It is the natural continuation of what the body has already begun. The thoughts will thin. They always do. The urgency will lose its edge. The loops will find fewer new directions. The mind will begin to drift rather than circle, will find itself in one thought, and then, without transition, in another, unrelated thought, the way dreams form at the edges of sleep, associative and soft and detached from consequence. This is already happening at the margins. The thoughts are already a little less tethered than they were. There are gaps between them now that were not there before. Small intervals of something less defined, less pressing, less attached to the weight of consequence. The mind does not need to manufacture these gaps. They are occurring naturally. The body's tiredness is doing its quiet work, drawing the mind gradually away from its daytime urgency and toward something slower, something older, something that does not think so much as drift. There is a quality to the mind in these moments, at the edges of sleep, that is different from ordinary waking thought. It is less tidy, less controlled. Associations form and dissolve without logic. One image gives way to another without connection. The rules of ordinary thinking relax. And in that relaxation, in that loosening of the grip, something like relief is already present. Not dramatic relief, not resolution, just the quiet relief of no longer holding on quite so tightly. The night is offering that now, in this moment. The body is already moving toward it. The breath is already slower than it was at the beginning of this hour. The muscles have already released some of what they were carrying. The mind is already less certain of itself than it was when the first worry arrived. This is just the night doing its work, and the night is very good at its work. Seneca wrote about how the physician does not apologize for the fever that breaks of its own accord, or for the wound that closes without intervention. Some things heal by the simple operation of natural processes, given time and the right conditions. The night, and the rest it brings, is one of those conditions. Not a cure for anything, not a solution, but the restoration of the baseline from which clearer sight and genuine engagement become possible again. The body understands this at a level far deeper than the mind does. The body has been doing this every night for the whole of a life. It has its own accumulated experience of what this hour is for, an experience that dwarfs the mind's understanding of it. The body knows how to be in the dark. It knows how to release the day. It knows how to use the quiet. It has been doing it without any instruction or intention, reliably, night after night, for as long as there has been a body to do it. There is something reassuring in that knowledge, something that makes the mind's uncertainty about how to rest feel a little less consequential. The mind does not need to figure out how to rest. The body already knows. The mind's only actual task at this hour is simply not to interfere too vigorously with what the body is already doing. And even that is not a task that requires effort. The body's pull toward sleep is stronger than the mind's pull toward wakefulness. Over time, the natural direction always reasserts itself. The mind may circle, the mind may resist, but the night continues, and the body's knowledge continues, and gradually, in the way that all things eventually find their natural direction, the tension eases, and what has always been coming finally comes. Epictetus lost a great deal in his life. He was born into slavery, and lived the early portion of his life without freedom in the ordinary sense. He was, reportedly, subjected to physical abuse by an owner who seems to have had little understanding or respect for the person he owned. He lived for years under conditions that represented, by almost any measure, a profound deprivation of what most people consider necessary for well-being. And what he arrived at, through all of that, was a distinction so precise that it has continued to be useful across centuries and vastly different circumstances. There is a part of you, he said, that cannot be taken away. Not by circumstance, not by other people, not by loss or failure or the worst that can happen. This part is the quality of your own judgment, the nature of your own intentions, the way you choose internally and privately to orient yourself toward what is happening. That is yours, entirely, unconditionally. It cannot be removed or damaged from outside. Everything else, he acknowledged, is less certain. Reputation can be damaged. Circumstances can change. The future cannot be secured. Other people cannot be controlled. Even the body is subject to conditions outside the self. All of this is real. All of it is part of life. But the inner orientation remains. This is not a small thing. When it is fully understood, it changes the nature of what is frightening about uncertainty. Most of what feels threatening about the future, about unresolved situations, about the possibility of things going wrong, is related to outcomes, to how things will turn out, to what other people will think, to how circumstances will be arranged. And all of these belong to the category of what is not entirely within our power, but the quality of who we are within those circumstances, that belongs to us entirely. And nothing that happens tonight, nothing that will happen tomorrow, nothing in any of the imagined futures currently under construction in the mind, changes that. The conversation went the way it went, and the internal response to it, the honesty of the self-reflection, the quality of the attention brought to what happened, the genuine consideration of whether anything was done that is worth revisiting. These are available. They are the actual territory where something real can be done, whether the other person understood, whether the outcome will be what is hoped for, whether tomorrow will be easier than it feels from here. These are outside the boundary of what is truly ours, and the mind, at this hour, is largely occupying itself with exactly those outside things, turning over outcomes, rehearsing scenarios, trying to anticipate and arrange what cannot be anticipated or arranged from here. It is applying its best efforts to a territory that is not available to it. The recognition of this is quieting, not because there is nothing left to care about, but because the caring can be properly located in the quality of the self, in the honesty of the intention, in the genuine question of whether anything was done that belongs to genuine reflection. And once that genuine reflection has occurred, even briefly, even imperfectly, the rest can be released. Not because it doesn't matter, but because it belongs to a different category from what is available right now. Epictetus was not offering this as a way to feel better. He was offering it as accuracy, as a correct description of where the boundaries of the self actually lie. And within those boundaries, things are actually fine. The actual self, the inner life, the quality of intention and attention and orientation that is not damaged by the conversation being uncertain, or by tomorrow being unknown, or by any of the things the mind is currently working through. It is intact. It continues. It was never under the threat the mind thinks it is under. And there is something in that steadiness, in the recognition that the core of what is genuinely ours remains undisturbed by everything the day brought, that can loosen the grip further. The things being worried about are mostly in the second category, the category of what is not fully ours to determine. They are real. They may require attention at the right time and in the right light, but they do not touch what is actually ours. What is ours is here, present, quiet, whole, undisturbed. There is a particular kind of solitude that arrives at this hour. Not loneliness, quite, though it can shade into that if allowed. More like a stripping away of the social layer, the performed version of the self that moves through the day navigating other people's perceptions and expectations and needs. That version of the self is, at this hour, off duty. There is no one to reassure or impress or carefully manage. There is just the self, alone with its actual contents, in the dark. This can feel exposing. The thoughts that arrive when the social layer falls away are not always the most comfortable ones. They tend toward the unfinished and the unresolved, the things that needed more care than the day allowed, the feelings that were set aside in the interest of function. The night, in this sense, is honest. It shows what was actually being carried. But there is another way to hold this solitude, not as exposure, but as something closer to company. The company of oneself, genuinely, without the pressure to be a particular version of that self for anyone else's benefit. Marcus Aurelius's private writing has this quality. It is clearly a man in conversation with himself, and the conversation is unusually honest. He does not flatter himself. He does not present a tidy version of his own inner life. He notes when he has fallen short of his own values. He questions whether his understanding is actually as deep as it needs to be. He returns to the same doubts and the same recognitions with the patience of someone who has accepted that this returning is simply the shape of the interior life. There is something in that which applies directly to this hour. The self, in the dark, alone with its thoughts, is not in a dangerous situation. It is in a situation of unusual honesty. The thoughts that are circling are the thoughts that were there all day, underneath the surface. They did not appear at night. They were carried through the day, and are now simply visible because the surface has cleared. This visibility is not a problem. It is information. Not necessarily information that requires action tonight, but information about what the day contained, about what mattered, about what is still unresolved. The mind is not manufacturing distress out of nothing. It is reporting what it found. The report does not require an immediate response. But it is worth acknowledging, quietly, that the mind is giving an accurate account of what it holds. That acknowledgement, without urgency, without the need to fix or resolve or dismiss, is itself a kind of respect for what is here, a recognition that the contents of the mind are real and deserve to be seen, even if they do not, tonight, require anything more than that. Seneca wrote about the evening review, the practice of examining the day before sleep. What was done well? What could have been done differently? What was learned? He described this not as self-punishment, but as honest accounting, the way a careful person might review the day's transactions not to generate guilt, but to understand what actually happened. The practice is gentle, brief. It arrives at a resting point rather than a perpetual spiral. This is different from the kind of reviewing that happens at night without intention. The replaying and the what-ifs and the escalating scenarios. The deliberate, gentle review that Seneca described has an end. It arrives somewhere. It acknowledges what was there, and then, having acknowledged it, allows it to rest. The mind, left to its own devices, often skips the acknowledgement and goes directly to the correction, or the defense, or the further elaboration of what might go wrong. But there is a quiet middle step available, the simple, honest acknowledgement that the day happened, that it contained what it contained, that the self moved through it imperfectly and genuinely, and as well as it could, and that this is complete now. The day is complete. It has already become part of the past, which is the one part of time that is, in its strange way, entirely safe. Nothing can alter it now, and within it, within the fixed and finished nature of it, there is already a kind of peace. Not the peace of everything having gone well, just the peace of things being finished, of the day having happened, of its being now exactly what it was, and no more than that. That is enough. It is, in a strange way, more than enough. There is a version of examining the day that Marcus Aurelius practiced that was less about cataloguing failures, and more about simply bearing witness. He would ask himself whether he had acted according to his values, whether he had been honest, whether he had attended to what was genuinely in his hands. And he would note the answers plainly, without drama in either direction, no excessive self-congratulation when the answer was yes, no extended self-flagellation when the answer was no, just noticing the same quality of clear, non-attached observation that he brought to the world around him, turned gently inward. This practice has a natural end point. It arrives at completion because the intention behind it is not to produce a verdict, but simply to see clearly. And clear seeing, by its nature, does not spiral. It observes, it notes, and it releases. Whatever the day held, it has been held by someone who was doing their genuine best within the conditions that were actually present. Not the ideal conditions. Not the conditions in which better choices would have been obvious. The actual conditions, with their particular tiredness and their particular pressures and their particular limited information. That is always the context in which the day is actually lived. Not in the retrospective light of perfect clarity, but in the moment-to-moment reality of what was known and felt and available at each step. The self that moved through today deserves the same quality of honest, non-harsh acknowledgement that a trusted friend would offer. The friend who sees clearly, but does not condemn. The friend who recognizes that the effort was genuine even when the outcome was imperfect. That friend is available, here, now, in the form of whatever part of the awareness can observe the day with some small degree of detachment and care. That is enough. The day was lived. It is complete. And the self that lived it is here now, tired and somewhat battered by the hours, lying in the dark, needing nothing from this moment but the simple permission to rest. That permission has always been available. It does not depend on anything being resolved. It does not require that the day be adjudicated and found acceptable before rest can come. It is simply here, offered by the night itself, unconditional and complete. The thoughts are a little slower now, or perhaps they are the same speed, and something else has shifted, something about the relationship to them. There are still thoughts. There will continue to be thoughts. The mind does not stop, but the urgency has changed its quality. The same concerns, if they are still present, carry a slightly different weight. Not because anything has been resolved, simply because time has passed, and because something in this hour has reminded the mind of what it already knew, and sometimes loses. That the weight it assigns to things is not fixed. That it can be quietly and without drama different. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the universe is change and life is opinion, which might be translated, loosely and with some interpretive generosity, as the world is constantly moving, and how we experience it is largely shaped by how we're looking at it. The events are one thing, the colouring applied to them is another, and the colouring, while it feels like the events themselves, while it feels like the simple truth of what is happening, is actually something that can be gently examined, questioned, held a little more lightly. The colouring of this particular night's worry, examined gently. It is the colour of tiredness, of late-night isolation, of the particular sharpness that anxiety has when it is not moderated by daylight and other people and ordinary forward motion. The colour is real as an experience. It is just not necessarily the accurate colour of the underlying thing. In the morning, the same concerns will likely appear in a slightly different shade. Not necessarily resolved, not necessarily smaller in any objective sense, but held within more context, more light, more of the texture of ordinary life that makes everything more manageable simply by being present. That morning is coming, has been coming since the night began, is approaching with the steadiness that everything approaches with, the quiet, inevitable movement of time through its sequence. This is not an urgent thing to remember. It requires nothing. It is just true. And in the meantime, there is this room, this quiet, this weight of blanket and warmth, the faint sounds of the night outside, whatever they are in this particular place, the subtle sounds of a world that is mostly asleep, mostly resting, mostly occupied with its own slow continuation. There is a quality to nights like this that is, underneath the restlessness, actually quite companionable. The rest of the world is here, too, in the dark. Billions of people, in different time zones, in different circumstances, each of them with their own version of this hour, their own version of the thoughts that arrive when the day ends, and the night holds them. All of them, in their different ways, navigating the same human condition, the mind's tendency to work harder than necessary, the difficulty of uncertainty, the wish that things could be arranged more neatly, the quiet hope that rest will come. This is not a lonely experience, even when it feels like one. It is one of the most shared experiences there is. Every person who has ever thought carefully about the nature of their own mind has passed through this same hour. Seneca, writing by lamp in ancient Rome, turning over the same kinds of concerns that arrive in the dark, wondering about time, about what matters, about how to hold difficulty without being consumed by it. Marcus Aurelius, in a tent somewhere on campaign, writing his private notes, reminding himself again of what he kept forgetting. Epictetus, having known far worse hours than this, finding his way to the same small, reliable ground. What is mine, and what is not mine? What can be changed, and what simply is? They were all here, too, in their own version of this. And they found, as anyone finds who keeps returning to it, that the ground holds. That steadiness is not built or achieved, but uncovered. That beneath the movement of the thoughts and the pull of the worries and the restlessness of this particular hour, there is something that simply is, something quiet and consistent, something that was not created by anything done today and cannot be damaged by anything that happened or will happen. It is here now. It has been here all along. The steadiness does not require a name or a philosophy or the words of ancient thinkers to be real. It exists prior to all of that. The Stoics did not invent it. They noticed it. They described it. They returned to it. But it was there before their descriptions, and it will be there after the last description fades. It is simply what remains when the noise reduces, when the urgency relaxes, when the body lies still, and the breath moves, and the room is quiet and nothing is being demanded. It is what is here now, in this particular moment. In this room, the breath is moving, has been moving throughout all of this, quietly, without being asked, without requiring anything. Each breath is complete in itself, not a step toward something else, not progress toward a goal. Just breath moving, air entering and leaving, the body doing its ordinary, unremarkable, continuous work. The weight of the blanket is still there, not changed, still present, still warm, still exerting its gentle, familiar pressure against the body. This weight that has been there since the beginning of this hour, unchanged by everything the mind has moved through. The room is quiet. Whatever sounds are present, they are the sounds of a room that is settled, a building that is at rest, a night that has reached its depth and is simply continuing. There is no urgency in these sounds. They do not carry anything. They are just the acoustic presence of the world, going about its business, indifferent in the best sense, simply proceeding. The darkness is soft. It has the quality that darkness has when the eyes have adjusted, and the initial tension of the night has passed. Not empty, not heavy, just present, like everything else, doing what it does. The body is lying still. The spine is settled. The muscles have been releasing gradually over this hour, some of them giving up tensions that were carried from the day, and that will not be needed again until tomorrow. The hands are loose. The face has relaxed, as faces do when the watching self withdraws a little. The jaw is soft. The thoughts are still present at their edges, but they have lost some of their insistence. They arise and they pass. Some of them circle. Some of them drift across the field of awareness without attaching to anything, like weather crossing a landscape. The landscape does not follow the weather. The weather simply passes through. There is nothing that needs to be done with the thoughts that are still here. They are just here. They are impermanent. They are not commands. They are not truths about the world that require belief or action. They are the mind doing what it knows how to do, working through what was given to it today, slowly finding its way toward whatever comes next. What comes next is rest, not forced, not decided, just the natural continuation of a direction that has been underway for some time. The mind moving from urgency to movement, to drift to quiet. The body holding its warmth, its weight, its breath. The room holding the body. The night holding the room. Marcus Aurelius wrote, in one of his quieter passages, about the way everything is connected. Not mystically, not dramatically, but in the simple factual sense that everything exists within a web of mutual dependence and continuous change. each thing affecting the things around it, each moment arising from the moment before it and giving way to the moment after. Nothing isolated, nothing truly alone within the whole. At this hour, in this room, in this particular darkness and warmth, that connection is present without needing to be named. The body is part of the night's chemistry. The breath is part of the room's air. The quiet is part of something much larger than this room, a world at rest, an ordinary night doing its ordinary, generous work of giving things back to themselves after the day's exertion. There is nothing missing from this moment, nothing that needs to be added, nothing that needs to be resolved before it can be what it is. It is simply the moment that it is, complete, present, sufficient. And in its sufficiency, in the simple and unhurried fact of its being here and being enough, there is something like recognition, not insight, not resolution, just the quiet acknowledgement that this is what it is, and what it is genuinely all right. The concerns will be there in the morning, or some of them will. Others will have quietly diminished on their own, the way worries sometimes do when they are not fed through the night. Whatever remains will be met in the morning light, with the morning mind, with the full context of a world that contains other people and other sounds, and the ordinary forward motion of a new day. But that is later. Later is its own thing. It does not need to be prepared for right now. Right now is simply this. The room is dark. The night is deep. The body is warm. The breath is moving. The thoughts are loosening their hold. The hour is late enough that the day is genuinely behind, truly past, already becoming something that happened rather than something that is happening. And ahead, not far, there is the quiet dissolution of sleep. It does not need to be reached for. It arrives on its own, in its own time, as it always has. The body knows the way. The breath knows the way. Something older than thought knows the way. All that is asked of this moment is simply to be in it, to let the weight be present, to let the warmth be present, to let the quiet sounds of the night be present, to let the breath move as it moves without being managed, to let the darkness be soft, and to let the thoughts, the ones that remain, the ones still passing through, drift as they drift, without following them too closely, without needing them to stop or to arrive anywhere in particular, just letting them be what they are, which is passing, which is impermanent, which is not the whole of what is here. The whole of what is here is larger than the thoughts, quieter than the thoughts, more continuous than the thoughts. It extends through the whole night, and has been here through the whole of this hour, and will be here when the last thought finally loses its grip, and there is nothing left but the breath, and the dark, and the slow, unhurried turning of the night toward morning. Nothing is required now, nothing at all. Just this, just here, just the quiet fact of being, still and warm and held by the ordinary miracle of a night that continues. The body is horizontal, the room is dark, the breath moves. These three things, so simple, so completely present, are actually all that is here. Everything else, the concerns about the day, the questions about tomorrow, the loops and the replays, and the imagined futures, all of that is made of thought. And thought is lighter than the body, less substantial than the room, more transient than the breath. It passes through like weather. It has always passed through. What remains when thought is quiet is exactly this: the weight, the warmth, the breath, the darkness that is not threatening, but simply the absence of light, which is the most ordinary thing in the world, the silence that is not empty, but full of the small sounds of a world at rest. There is no destination left tonight. The night itself is the destination. This room, this body, this breath, this moment. There is nowhere to arrive that is not already here. Epictetus spoke of the freedom that comes from genuinely understanding what is and what is not within our reach. And one of the things that is within reach, always, in every circumstance, in the darkest hour and the most uncertain situation, is simply the quality of being present to what is actually here, not to what is feared, not to what is hoped for, not to what might have been or might yet be, just to what is. What is here is the breath. The breath is here, and the next breath, and the quiet between them, and the warmth of the body that receives each breath and releases it without effort, without thought, without needing anything to be different from what it is. The mind may still have something to say. It often does, even here, even at the last margin of wakefulness. A final loop, a final concern surfacing like something brought up from below. This is not a failure. It is just the mind being the mind, doing what it has always done, running its patterns to the end of its available energy. It will finish. It always finishes. And when it does, there is only the breath and the dark and the extraordinary ordinary fact of a body lying still, while the night continues its long, unhurried work. The night does not need anything from this moment. It is already doing what it does. It will continue doing it whether the mind is still or moving, whether the thoughts have resolved or are still circling. The night is patient in the way that only very old things are patient. It has no agenda. It is simply here, as it has always been here, as it will continue to be here, absorbing the day's residue and preparing the ground for the next morning. The morning is coming, not urgently, not with any demand, just coming, the way everything comes, because that is the direction things move in. The night will give way, gradually, imperceptibly, to a lightening at the edges. The darkness will change its quality before it changes its depth, and something in the body, that quiet biological intelligence that operates entirely outside the reach of thought, will begin its preparation. But that is later, still later, far enough away that it does not need to be anticipated. For now, the night is here, the darkness is here, the breath is here, the warmth is here, the room is here, and in the room a mind that has been working hard tonight, harder perhaps than it needed to, harder certainly than the hour required, is beginning, at last, to lay down its work. Not because it was told to, not because it arrived somewhere, simply because the night has continued long enough that the effort of continuing is greater than the relief of releasing, and the body has always known which way to choose. The weight is present, the breath moves, the darkness is soft, and the rest that has been here all along, waiting quietly underneath everything, is here too. Still, steady, continuous, receiving,